Bill, how you doing this week?
I'm good. How are you? We missed you last week.
Yes, you and Bill Butler did a wonderful session on energy, among other topics.
We can't get off of energy, can we?
No. Well, it's working for us conservatives, so we're going to go ahead and stick with it.
Whatever makes conservatives happy, it makes me happy.
Exactly. I heard that about you, Bill.
So what is the Don't Go Revolution doing this week?
Well, the online right is, and our larger right-wing noise machine, our friends on Talk Radio, we are all pushing back as hard as we possibly can against what we see as the inevitable cave-in from the Lindsey Grahams of our party. And this has manifested itself in the form of a Gang of 10 compromise, which last week really started picking up opposition to when Kimberly Strassel, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal, wrote an article coming out strongly against the plan.
My favorite line of that piece was how the Gang of 10 intends to pay for all this in part by raising taxes on oil companies.
It was raising taxes on
the horrors.
It was raising taxes on you. She had a little ... There was some suspense in there. She was building on oil companies. Yes. Since we're talking about, I'll go ahead and read from it. This is the kind of nut graph of the most important part of it. She's talking about why it's a bad deal for conservatives. That's because the plan is a Democratic giveaway. New production on offshore federal lands is left to state legislatures, and then only 4 coastal states.
No, not states' rights.
The regulatory hurdles are huge, and the bill bars drilling within 50 miles of the coast, putting off limits some of the most productive states. Alaska's oil-rich Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is still a no-go. The highlight is instead $84 billion in tax credits, subsidies, and federal handouts for alternative fuels and renewables. The Gang of 10 tends to pay for all this, in part by raising taxes on ... oil companies. So, the online right is very much against it. Rush Limbaugh has been on message about this. The Corner, you name it. There's been strong pushback, and Bob Corker, senator from Tennessee, has noticed all this is going on. So he called one of his constituents, who just happens to be Glenn Reynolds at Instapundit, and kind of gave Glenn, his defense of the bill, and he had 8 points, 8 defenses. I'll run through them really quickly.
So who's this now?
This is Senator Bob Corker.
Okay, it's not a blogger.
Well, but he called up Instapundit personally, and said, "I want to defend this plan, and put on your blog." And so Glenn, took notes and transcribed Bob Corker's defense of it. So this is Glenn's version of Corker's defense from their phone call. The Gang of 10 bill would unilaterally open up drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. So at least in one area, Corker is quick to point out there's no state veto. But he concedes there's states vetoes everywhere else. But he really wants to point out that it unilaterally opened up drilling in Gulf of Mexico. Number 2, bill allows seismic exploration along the entire OCS. 3, the ban on drilling within 50 miles was already in the other GOP bill, so there's no ground lost there, according to him. 4, he says that the idea that this is a lifeline for Obama is CRAP. And then Glenn points out that Corker actually spelled out crap on the phone. And says that, if Obama braced this Gang of 10 compromise, he'd be the, quote, biggest flip-flopper ever. Point number 5 was the bill includes a Zubrin-like flex fuel provision, required 75% of cars by 2015 and 85% of cars by 2020 be capable of running on something other than gasoline. Number 6, the bill also has coal to liquid stuff in it. Number 7, the bill is, quote, incredibly aggressive on nuclear power. And number 8, the bill also promotes cellulosic ethanol. So this was largely underwhelming. Ace of Spades, a well-credentialed conservative blogger, says that Corker is, quote, giving away far too much. It's bad enough that huge reserves of ANWR remain off the table, but we're now going to permanently declare most of the Pacific off limits as well. This is the common refrain on the right, is that now the OCS ban has to be voted on every year as part of an interior appropriations bill. And what the Gang of 10 compromise would do was, instead of turning that into an annual approval. It would actually put it into law, which would be ground lost as far as conservatives are concerned on the OCS issue. But I understand you and David Roberts over at Gristmill have a different take on the Gang of 10 compromise.
Well, before I get into our two posts, I should point out that the Gang of 10 proposal came down, I think it was about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
On a Friday, when Obama said, I don't like parts of this. I don't like the coastal drilling parts, but I would accept it if it was part of a comprehensive energy package.
Right.
There were a lot of folks on the left that called that a cave, and he was tagged as a flip-flopper. I would say I think that is a misuse of the phrase. A flip-flop is a politically motivated change in position.
And this wasn't?
Well, no, it's not. There's a difference between a change in position and a willingness to compromise.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
There is. I mean, they're different things. Now, you can still be critical of it. I'm not saying that makes Obama a bad or a good person. Just as a technical matter, John McCain changed his position on coastal drilling. He was once against it, and now he is for it.
That's true. And we're still hoping. We're still hoping he goes that way on ANWR as well.
And you keep hope alive. And whether that's a flip-flop or a politically legitimate change in position, that's a subjective call based on whether you think it's politically motivated or because the facts on the ground's changed. Barack Obama is saying, I still don't like coastal drilling. I am still arguing against it on the merits. He still does on a consistent basis, but I would accept it in a limited fashion as part of a larger bill. That's a softening of one's position. That's not the same as a flip-flop in one's position.
So you disagree with Bob Corker, this is not Obama flip-flopping?
Just as a technical point, it's not. Now, whether Republicans could succeed in making it be perceived that way is another matter. But I, for one, think it's factually inaccurate to call it a flip-flop. That aside, there were definitely folks on the left not happy about it. And this past week when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, was on Larry King, and she gave a nod to say, maybe I would allow something like this to come for a vote, where before she had said she would not let any drilling proposal come to a vote.
Right. She is also, I guess you would say she's not flip-flopping or retreating. You'd say she is compromising.
Well, in that respect, now let's see how this actually goes. She's not changing her personal position on drilling as how she would act procedurally. You could argue that was a flip-flop or will be a flip-flop. Let's see what actually transpires. When she did that, there were folks on the left that were not happy. Some on the left not happy. Shakesville, William Wolfram at the Shakesville blog said of conservatives, they do know how to negotiate, and the moment they saw weakness from Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama, they realized they could get all the drilling in environmentally conserved areas that their masters required. American Street said in a post called Quick Note to Supposed Democrat Nancy Pelosi, you're going to actually let the Republicans' dog and pony show influence your position on offshore drilling? Why don't you just switch your party affiliation to faux Republican independent like Holy Joe Lieberman and be done with it? So there's definitely some anger over there about this. Now, David Roberts at Grist, who's one of the probably one of the most widely read environmental bloggers, had this to say, a different take. Obama and Pelosi have both signaled in the last week that they would be willing to support the bill. They would give a little ground on drilling, which they don't favor, in order to place measures that support renewables, which they do favor. For their efforts, the media has now said they flip-flopped on drilling. Meanwhile, McCain has refused to support the compromise. House Republicans have refused to support the compromise. Rush Limbaugh and his band of ditto heads are absolutely ballistic on the compromise, flooding the legislators responsible with angry phone calls and claiming that's going to sink McCain's presidential campaign. To summarize, Democratic leaders have signaled they are willing to meet Republicans halfway in order to pass a comprehensive energy policy. Republicans have refused, demanding a vote that would do nothing but serve the interests of their oil company donors. In other words, Republicans are avoiding anything that might move legislation forward quite deliberately. They see this as a political winner, and they don't want it to get resolved. And that point was backed up in the Wall Street Journal article that Bob Corker was quoted in. Those are the facts, all publicly available. Now go out and read a few stories about this in national newspapers. Watch a little cable news. Is this what you hear? Is this what the Republic is being told? No. Republicans are being rewarded for their foot-stomping and transigence by having their all-of-the-above line passed along uncritically. Democrats are being rewarded for their willingness to compromise by being tagged flip-floppers. Sometimes I wonder how Nancy Pelosi avoids pulling her hair out. So you're having different reactions as far as Pelosi's actions on this. In my own post, I won't read it in length, but I really focused on. This is, I think, some of the hole that conservatives have dug for themselves on all of the above messaging. All of the above, as the overarching frame, implies compromise. Implies that you are going to accept things that are traditionally liberal and things traditionally conservative in one overall package. And then when conservatives are presented with a package that follows those lines, because it does things that makes big oil unhappy, all of a sudden it's a massive sellout. So it contradicts the messaging groundwork that conservatives laid for themselves. And I think to the extent that folks on the left were worried this was going to be a big cave-in, it's now looking to me like an opportunity for Democrats to say, hey, we're willing to do all the above. Someone else here on the right is so deep in the pocket of big oil they can't meet us halfway.
Yes. I think, I obviously disagree with Roberts in some ways, and I think he has a big contradiction in his post right there. At one point he says the Gang of 10 has put together a compromise bill which would do exactly what the Republicans say they want, but then later on he says the Democratic leaders have signaled they're willing to meet the Republicans halfway. And I think that, he does nail what the battleground is going to be. Is, the Republicans still have their all-of-the-above legislation. You have the Senate Republican version, which, Lindsey Graham has, the Gang of 10, which hardcore conservatives hate. And then you have the House plan, which is the all-of-the-above label, which conservatives do support. And
what is all of the above in the House conservative plan?
Well, when they say all of the above, they mean all. Is that, the Republican plan has all of the tax has all the tax implications, has all the tax provisions that the Democrats ones do, supporting wind and solar and biofuels.
It has long-term renewable tax energy credits?
A permanent ones. So they don't do them annually.
So why didn't conservatives support that when it was on the floor before? Why do they keep filibustering that piece of it?
The compromise is that conservatives are willing to support that all of the above part. They're willing to go ahead and go with making those tax permanent if they actually get the opening up of ANWR, opening up of all the OCS. In that is what Republicans don't want to give up, is that, as I said before, the Gang of 10 compromise is a step backwards on OCS, in that right now the OCS ban is something that has to be renewed every year as part of an appropriations vote. Now, not only is it cobbled together in just 4 states, and only if they approve, and they put the Pacific Ocean permanently off, that has now becomes a codified ban. That's a step backwards, not forwards. That's a loss. Furthermore, ANWR isn't even part of the deal. That's, an conservative estimate, 10.4 billion barrels of oil right there. That's completely off the table. So there is no all of the above. There is no all in the Gang of 10 plan.
Well, there would be more drilling than before in the southeast part of the country. And there would be
in
more
the Gulf
money
of Mexico,
for...
maybe.
No, the Gulf of Mexico part would be definitely.
The Gulf of Mexico, maybe, if you can still get through all the rest of the environmental hurdles. Then for Florida, Virginia, and the Carolina states, you still have to get the state legislatures to sign on. And then California is completely off the table.
I thought conservatives like states' rights. That's where government is closest to the people. Isn't that what you want?
Well, we would rather have the land be turned over to private hands. We discussed this last time. If the government wants to sell off all the land it owns in the West, that'd be great. Or we might even take that deal. If you wanted to leave ANWR up to Alaska instead of Congress, we might take that deal. But that's not on the table.
I'm not a states' rights person blindly. I'm just trying to follow conservative logic here. We know on the Pacific Coast, every single governor, Republican and Democrat, is against drilling off the coast. So you're never going to get it there anyway.
But the latest polls show out of California, San Francisco Chronicle reports, the polls out of California show California support coastal drilling. So that may change.
If you actually look at that field poll closely, there is a rise in support for drilling from 41 to 51. But it's obviously 51 as a poll number, essentially a down-the-middle divided number. But support for clean energy, for renewable energy, is off the charts. There's broad consensus across the ideological spectrum for that. And this is the untold story of the polling that I talked about in my post at Campaign for America's Future, both today and 2 weeks ago. Conservatives have made this bet that the public is in a swoon over drilling. Now, there's definitely a spike in support for it because there's been a one-side argument about it for the last 6 weeks, and the left has not done a good job at countering the argument. But there's still a deeper, broader support for clean energy. You now have a compromise on the table that increases some drilling and puts some money, not as much money as the left would want, for clean energy. And for conservatives to walk away from that, I think they're misreading where the public is at on it. They had some success in increasing support for coastal drilling, but it is in conjunction still with clean energy. When that package is on the table, conservatives are going to walk away from it. They might be snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory on this for themselves.
Yeah, no, I mean, we just disagree. I mean, the conservatives down the line want to see ANWR and the OCS opened up, and any bill that does not include that is not all of the above. And so they're not going to get it. And, they're confident that the American people are getting the message. And, anytime you get, I think what Republicans are counting on is that anytime somebody has to go explain the Gang of 10 compromise and say, oh, we're opening up some oil only immediately in the Gulf of Mexico and then only in 4 other states and only if the state legislature sign, as soon as you start into that long story about how the Gang of 10 kind of opens up some oil maybe, that takes away from the harder hitting rhetoric of the conservatives that come back and say, we want all of it open tomorrow. The fastest oil pumps you could get going are the ones in the Pacific and California.
Tomorrow is 10 years from now, right?
No,
there is no tomorrow when it comes to drilling.
It's not tomorrow, but it's a lot quicker than 10 years, especially for the ones in the Pacific coast that were shut down and most of the scientific exploration has already been done. Those can get up even quicker. But this is where the ground is going to be, and that it is going to continue to be a big issue, and it's going to be a fight over who can best frame it as to whether or not the sides are giving not a fair compromise, and conservatives are going to keep hitting back, and that the Gang of 10 is just takes the all out of the all of the above, that it's a complete cop out on the drilling portion of it.
So. Beyond gas prices and energy,
yes.
An issue that has dominated the entire summer, we had a new issue, a new development crop up in the blogosphere.
Not completely unrelated to energy, though.
Totally. What's
not
that?
completely unrelated to energy, though.
Not at all. Not at all. The conflict between Russia and Georgia, I think, sparked a lot of interesting blog chatter. I think particularly on the left, you got a lot of blog chatter and analysis that you weren't hearing in the traditional media. I wrote my own post about it, about how I think the left did not do a good job at elevating those voices. The neocons, despite their tarnished credibility after the debacle of Iraq, they still have a apparatus in place where they can take advantage of crises and get their arguments and messages out within a 24-hour time frame and shape and frame broader news. The left, particularly on foreign policy, has not established that kind of operation. Having said that, there's a lot of interesting stuff that was out there if you dug for it. Steve Clements of the Washington Note, he wrote, when Kosovo declared independence in February and the U.S. and other European states recognized it, thus sidestepping Russia's veto in the UN Security Council, many of us believed. I should say Steve Clemens is at the New America Foundation. He's an interesting blogger. He's got 1 foot in the foreign policy establishment and 1 foot in the blogosphere. Many of us believe that the price for Russian cooperation and other major global problems just went much higher, and that the chance of a clash over Georgia's breakaway border provinces increased dramatically. By pushing Kosovo the way the U.S. did and aggravating nationalist sensitivities, Russia could, in reaction, be rationally expected to further integrate and cultivate South Ossetia and Abkhazia under de facto Russian control and pull these provinces that border Russia away from the state of Georgia. At the time, there was word from senior-level sources that Russia had asked the U.S. to stretch an independent process for Kosovo over a longer stretch of time and tie it to some process of independence for the 2 autonomous Georgia provinces. In exchange, Russia would not veto the creation of a new state of Kosovo at the Security Council. The U.S. rejected Russia's secret entreaties and instead rushed recognition of Kosovo and said damn the consequences. Now thousands are dead. The fact is that a combination of American recklessness, serious miscalculation, overreach by Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili, as well as Russia's forceful reassertion of its regional national interest and status as an oil and gas-rich, tough international player means America and Europe have yet again helped generate a crisis that tests U.S. global credibility. I apologize for my myriad of mispronunciations, I'm sure, throughout that. There was other stuff of note. Matthew Iglesias said, I think this highlights some of the limits of the kind of bluff and bluster approach to foreign policy that seems popular amongst conservatives these days. Or rather, it highlights the fact that popular as bluster-based policymaking is on the American right, it can have some extremely high costs, that tragically a large proportion of those costs can wind up being borne by the people who are nominally supposed to be their beneficiaries. That's Matthew Iglesias' new home at the Center for American Progress, Think Progress blog. He also posted later how Russia went completely over the line in pushing farther into Georgia. So by no means do you see on the left, a siding with Russia, merely a understanding of the complexity and fault that lies on a number of players. Lawyers, Guns, and Money had lots of great analysis. The Agonist shared a great anecdote when Sean Paul Kelly was in Georgia talking to Georgian experts there. Newshoggers, American Footprints, Foreign Policy Watch. There was lots of great stuff out there, but I don't think you really saw it get into the larger discourse, which was very dominated by a lot of neoconservative framing that was very simplistic. Georgia good guy, Russia bad guy. And obviously McCain had a great part in amplifying that argument.
Yeah, I guess I would just start out. Rich Lowry had a great post because Joe Klein, had a reaction afterwards, kind of along Matthew Iglesias' line. He was talking about, those neocons, they're so terrible. They're completely out of their mind when they talk about Russia's into Georgia. They keep coming up with all these Nazi analogies. And, of course, Lowry points out that the great known neocon Richard Holbrooke had an op-ed in the Washington Post.
Well, Flint Leverett, former Bush national security aide, was on Countdown with Keith Olbermann, who basically called Richard Holbrooke a neocon.
Well, so. I think we can safely agree between us that when most people use the word neocon, they're not talking about Richard Holbrooke, right? I mean, that's...
Well, there appears to be some debate on that point.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and say that most people would not consider Richard Holbrooke a neocon. And Lowry was quick to point out that while Klein was trying to condemn Kagan for making Nazi analogies, it was actually Holbrooke is the one who actually cited Nazis in his piece. And Holbrooke went on to conclude in his op-ed, well, no one wants a return to cold-style war confrontation. Moscow's behavior poses a direct challenge to Europe and the European and international order. And, I guess I read Matthew Iglesias, and I was just really, I beat up on him for a second here, disappointed by all of his reactions, and that there was just so much equivocation on the left. They'll call it contrast and nuance, but just
what's equivocal here in the analysis?
Well, I'll give you a point. Matthew Iglesias cites Benjamin Franklin, who says commentators of all stripes seem to assume that Russia's move into Georgia was driven by its increasingly autocratic nature. And then the post goes on to talk about how the United States is not particularly tolerant of hostile states in its border either, basically equivocating the United States on Russia. And then Matt says, this is not to justify Russia's behavior. But then he goes on to write, America's treatments of its neighbors in Latin America has often been criminal, just like Russia's treatments of its neighbors. That's equivocation right there. Matt continues, but to look at the fact that Russia mistreats its neighbor as a symptom of domestic dysfunction or a precursor of a campaign for world domination is way off base. Consider what would happen if the government of Cuba, under the mistaken belief that the backing of Moscow and Beijing, decided to launch a military attack on Guantanamo Bay. And that just shows a complete naivete about what Russia is trying to accomplish. Matt, throughout his posts, first keeps trying to minimize the action and what's going on. Today, he's happily citing to a post he has up on the American Prospect, in which he writes, the war between Russia and Georgia, which appears mercifully to have ended, is of course bubble-like Syrian experience, and he goes on. But as anyone knows who's been following the word North, the war is not over. As much as Matt would, desperately hope that it would be, it's just clearly not. And it just shows his complete naivete on what Russia is trying to accomplish here. To go back,
Iglesias also chastised Russia for pushing on. So I don't understand where's the naivete in that?
Is that he tries to limit the action to just the South Osetia and however you pronounce the Ashkelon region, and does not see the larger context of what Russia is trying to do. And just takes Russia's foreign minister's line completely at word.
Really represents what Iglesias was saying at all.
Well, he definitely takes the line that Georgia provoked this, as does Steve Clemens.
And there's an argument there. That's not the same as being completely unaware of the larger georgeopolitical.
It's not something they're emphasizing.
You're seeing a stronger emphasis of Georgia's possible share of the blame here, because that piece of the analysis is completely devoid in neocon analysis, and therefore has become completely devoid in traditional media analysis. And the fact of the matter is, it's not equivocating to recognize that it's a complex situation when they're not clear-cut good guys and bad guys.
When you write, America's treatments of its neighbors in Latin America has often been criminal, just like Russia's treatments of its neighbors, as Matt did. That's equivocation. There's no way around that.
Say it again?
Matt wrote, America's treatment of its neighbors in Latin America has often been criminal, just like Russia's treatment of its neighbors. That's equivocation.
What's equivocal about that?
It's saying America's crimes are just as bad as Russia's.
No, it's not. It's not saying that. It's not saying conservatives are obsessed with all this moral relativism crap, but to recognize, we had a Monroe Doctrine. We had a geopolitical interest in maintaining a great amount of influence in our hemisphere, and that Russia has an interest in doing the same. And there are times in our history where certain administrations did bad things in executing that doctrine. It's just historical fact. It doesn't mean that America is inherently bad and Russia is inherently amoral and should be treated with kid gloves. It's just recognizing that it's very hard to exercise leverage in an opposite hemisphere of the world. And by blustering and making threats that you can't follow through on, that does not enhance your leverage and doesn't make the situation better.
The nature of America's rule in the Americas, of the United States' rule in the Americas, and the nature of Russia's rule in Eastern Europe over the past, since the 19th century, are just astronomically different. Just as far as body count, just as far as all the millions of people Stalin killed versus the United States. But also Matt continually tries to make fun of neocons for saying that the tanks are going to roll tomorrow into Ukraine, tomorrow into Estonia, which minimizes Russia's larger campaign and what they are trying to accomplish by bullying Georgia, and that this does definitely matter to the rest of those old Soviet states. And Russia is trying to establish a zone of control, which is going to make the lives of all those people a lot worse. Just a quote from the Washington. Washington Post.
Matt is making that point to some degree. I mean, Matt is recognizing. I think everyone recognizes that Russia is trying to expand its influence in what's called the near abroad, and not everyone aren't happy about that. But it's really recognizing that it's not historically unprecedented for a large country to want to do that, and to recognize there are difficulties in trying to restrain that, particularly when, to tie back to your earlier point, and David Roberts at Grist made this point, we remain an oil-dependent nation, and since conservatives have repeatedly, going back to Reagan, blocked investment in renewable energy that would have made us less dependent, that has reduced our leverage when we need energy from that part of the world right now. If we didn't, we'd have more leverage. If we didn't have already invaded a country in Iraq for spurious reasons, we'd have more moral authority to throw around, be able to unite the international community better. So we've lost a lot of those tools in our arsenal, and to recognize that fact and recognize the tools, the cards that Russia has to play, is the opposite of naive. It's just trying to analyze the situation for what it is.
I'll just end on this note. Ben Smith's Politico, writing about Obama's evolution on the issue, wrote, after Obama came out with his third response on it, he says, Obama's out with another statement on Georgia this afternoon, one that brings him into line with the hardening international stance. He clearly condemns Russia. And he goes on to detail how Obama's new position is like McCain's, and only finishes up with this. The substantive differences are now quite small. McCain wants an element of NATO to take up the situation. Obama first looks to the UN. But as Jake Tapper notes, the statements are different in tone, with Obama closing with a note of conciliation and McCain taking a harder line. So,
what's new of Obama's position? I believe he always supported Georgia's admission into NATO. So what's new?
You have to ask Ben. I mean, Obama's first couple of statements were very equivocative as far as who's all fault, Georgia or Russia, and he's definitely come around into saying we need to do more to support Georgia.
I think those are very minor shifts in tone. There aren't changes in position. And there still is I would agree, there's definitely, I think, an attempt on the Obama campaign to blur some of the distinctions with McCain on this, because McCain did get the upper hand in the media coverage of his statements. But there still is in the Obama statement a recognition that Georgia has some blame to share, which, of course, McCain does not describe at all. And that is in part because Georgia has a paid lobbyist of theirs on McCain's staff, which is not necessarily the best way to conduct foreign policy. So I would dispute that Obama has embraced McCain's position. He was leading Georgia anyway. In the debates with Senator Clinton, he had called out the Bush administration for having a weak Russia policy months ago. So I don't really see where the change is here. Like, there was a mild shift in tone from Obama's first statement, which I think is perfectly acceptable, because at the drop of a hat, you don't know all the facts on the ground immediately. But there's no real change in position here.
Well, I'll just say that as you already admitted, this so far has helped McCain optically, and contrary to Matthew Iglesias' assertion, this war is not over, and it will continue to go on. But so should we. We're going to discuss Vice President possible nominations and the moves for and against them.
Well, there has definitely been in recent days, a huge amount of online organizing on the left to prevent a VP choice of Senator Evan Bayh, who is probably the most conservative Democrat in the Senate right now that Joe Lieberman has essentially left the ranch. And you have a Facebook group that was started by the blogger and band, Max and the Marginalized, called 100,000 Strong Against Evan Bayh. Steve Clemens at the Washington Note picked it up, as well as Open Left and a number of other prominent blogs. I think it has about 2,000 plus members at the moment, but it's only been in effect, I think, for about 36 hours. So it will be interesting to see if, and I don't know if we were able to fully know, for example, if Evan Bayh does not get, if you can credit the online organizing to it or not. We'll see if there's any reporting around that. But there at least has been made, it's been made clear that there isn't a portion of the left that sees Evan Bayh as uniquely wrong for the position. And going back to my discussion with Bill last week, I think there are other parts of the liberal blogosphere that aren't putting a premium on the vice presidential choice, that see it as just don't see it as something that reflects how Obama would govern and shouldn't be elevated into a major flashpoint. But obviously there are on the left that take the opposite view. And I wonder, it's hard to know, is that going to make the Obama campaign pause and say, hey, maybe it's going to be a bridge too far to go to Evan Bayh now?
Yeah, I've never thought for a second Bayh was going to be the nominee. I thought it was going to be Webb. Now, since he's bowed out, I think it's going to be Salibius. But I did like a reaction to an article in the New York Times by David Serrata over at Open Left. The article is about Move On and how Move On was basically fine with an Evan Bayh vice president nomination. And Serrata writes in response, in effectively okaying the VP nomination of a politician who has consistently voted against Move On's organizational mission, the Move On leadership lets us in on a secret that I reported in my book, namely that Move On today operates first and foremost as a partisan appendage. Instead of using the VP question and the question of the presidential election as a whole as an instrument to build the anti-war movement, Move On, quote, suggests the organization is willing to go along with almost anyone Obama chooses, regardless of how their career has undermined that movement, regardless of whether Bayh's backers are citing his potential nomination as proof that the Democratic Party should reject the Move On movement, that Move On purports to champion. And John Hincke over at the Next Right cites this and responds, as Pat Buchanan said, every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket. It will be fascinating to watch how the progressives react as they shift from storming the castle and turn to the business of actually governing the castle. And then in a somewhat related post, not really talking about vice president nomination, but Armando over at Talk Left highlighted a Glenn Greenwald interview with Mort Halperin, where Halperin was talking about why he switched his position on FISA. And Glenn notes that Halperin's shift on FISA happened exactly the same time as Obama's. Glenn writes, "There's only one meaningful change that occurred between Halperin's June 9th opposition to FISA and his July 8th support for FISA capitulation. Namely, it was in that interim on June 20th that Barack Obama announced that he would support the FISA bill." And then Armando continues, "There are many progressive blogs and Obama supporters who are Halperin progressives. I am not one of them."
Well, I should note a couple things. One, Armando, or also known as Big Tent Democrat at Talk Left, he's been an Obama critic for a very long time.
That's true. Glenn wasn't, though.
True. I know.
Up until FISA.
Glenn is upset with Obama specific to FISA.
Right. But Glenn was. I don't know. Actually, I forget. I know he wasn't a big fan of Clinton, but was he ever a big Obama fan?
I'm not sure. I don't think Glenn ever really took a partisan line during the primary at all.
That's my instinct as well.
And a number of prominent bloggers are in that camp. Armando / Big Tent Democrat was very critical of Obama for a while, and I believe was actively supporting Clinton. I don't want to swear to that, but that's my remembrance. Now, David Sirota, I should also know, is a colleague of mine at Campaign for America's Future. Not that his statement there is representative of Campaign for America's Future, but I should note that. I think Move On would greatly disagree with Sirota's characterization there. I'm sure they would say we're a member-based organization. We're not an appendage of any party. They certainly have taken actions that were critical of Democratic Party politicians at times. They were critical of Obama about the FISA matter, even after their membership formally endorsed him. But Move On is, they don't make decisions really without membership input. They're a bottom-up organization essentially. So they can't have the drop of a hat say, we oppose Evan Bayh.
But they could put a poll question out there.
They could.
Which they've done in the past.
For VP?
Well, not for VP, but on issues, whatever is in the news.
And they may have made a decision that, this is not a priority matter for us to weigh in on. Again, I think there are parts of the left that do not see the vice presidential pick as being all that relevant to how an eventual president is going to govern. So they may have made a decision that's not an end-all, be-all thing for them. I don't think that's the same. I mean, if that's their calculation, that's not the same as we are an appendage of the party. We don't care. Obama can do whatever he wants, and we'll never question him, because they have already questioned Obama on FISA. So I think that I would disagree with my friend and colleague David Sirota on that point, and I certainly assume Move On would. So there's definitely diversity of thought in the liberal blogosphere when it comes to Obama. There's no doubt about that. I don't think it is getting so far as being divisive. I've long said I think that it's hurt Obama that the blogosphere has not rallied to him as strongly as they might have in giving him help when various misinformation, distortion, and smears come up. And we might talk about that when we talk about Jerome Corsi's new book. But I wouldn't overstate the level of discord in this respect.
Fair enough. Do you want to go ahead and talk about Jim Corsi's new book?
Jim Corsi.
I'm sure you ordered it on Amazon as soon as available and got your hot little hands on it and have poured through it.
So you're a fan of Corsi. You embrace everything he says. You're promoting his book, so I can only assume you're eager to have it be consumed and read and his opinions and thoughts embraced.
That's not true. I have email proof that you're the one who wanted to talk about this subject.
Well, in our mission of what's being discussed in the blogosphere, he is being discussed. And I do think it is a feather in the cap for Media Matters this week. And I would equate Media Matters with being part of the blogosphere in the broadest sense. They have done the spade work in debunking what is in Corsi's book. And even though I think there's more publicity for it than most liberal bloggers would like, and certainly criticism of the mainstream traditional media for giving him any kind of perch at all, merely because it's at number one on the New York Times bestseller list and not because of the merits of the content of the book. You have seen, and most notably on Larry King Live, it was last night, they would not have Corsi on without having a Media Matters representative on, challenging him every step of the way. That's a pretty big advancement relative to where we were with 2004 and Unfit for Command and Swiftboats for Truth, where those guys got a 2-week head start before you really saw any kind of debunking of what was happening, and all that stuff did get debunked, but it was too little too late in the minds of many.
I haven't read the Media Matters stuff. What are some of the, because I read the Washington Post write-up today, and I don't know if they were specifically trying not to give credence to any untrue charges, but I didn't really see anything new in the book. At least nothing in the Washington Post made me believe that there was anything new that Corsi was alleging. Is there anything new that Media Matters points out as false?
Well, I don't think there is too much that's new, and that may be a hampering for Corsi. There isn't a headline or a scoop that's driving sales. It's just, I think, sort of standard conservative movement embrace of their favorite authors. Even though there may be some conservative distancing from Corsi because of some of the other bigoted things that he's said in the past, there clearly is an appetite in the conservative rank and file for the book, or else it wouldn't be debuting at number one. The book's from. I obviously haven't read it. I'm reading Media Matters. It just seems to be
Does Media Matters have anything? Or what do they say that's not true?
I have a very long document here.
Well, pick your two favorites, or one favorite.
Two favorites. Corsi basically suggests that Obama's father, Barack Obama Sr., may have divorced his mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, quote, following the prescripts of Islamic Sharia law. Corsi's sole source for this statement is a blogger who made the claim in a March 20th post which featured the false headline, Barack Hussein Obama was a Muslim for 31 years, and misstated Obama's mother's name as Shirley Ann. The blogger Corsi cited, who's named Majalah Bulanan Kumad Itas Indonesia di Edmonton, I assume that is not his actual name, provide no substantiation for the claim that the senior Obama divorced Dunham according to Sharia law.
So what is the truth? Did they divorce under Hawaii law? Or did he just leave? Because I don't even know. I know he went back and had other wives in Africa, but I don't know what the legal situation he left his wife in Hawaii was.
Well, Media Matters cites Dreams for My Father, Obama's book himself. Obama quotes his mother stating, Barack Obama Sr., quote, I divorced him.
There you go. So he left, and then she probably filed for no opposition divorce in Hawaii there.
Obama's book continues, the teapot whistled, and I stamped my envelope. Then, without any prompting, my mother began to retell an old story in a distant voice as if she were retelling it to herself. Quote, it wasn't your father's fault that he left, I divorced him. When the two of us got married, your grandparents weren't happy with the idea, but they said okay. They probably couldn't have stopped us anyway, and they eventually came around to the idea that it was the right thing to do. Then Barack's father, your grandfather Hussein, wrote Gramps this long, nasty letter saying that he didn't approve of the marriage. He didn't want the Obama blood sullied by a white woman, he said. But you can imagine how Gramps reacted to that. And then there was a problem with your father's first wife. He had told me they were separated, but it was a village wedding, so there was no legal document that could show a divorce.
So they might not even be legally married.
Well, that's right. So there's nothing in there, and
it's all news to me. I don't care.
But that's an example of how Corsi operates. Random rumor mongering on an unnamed blog is now elevated as legitimate evidence. So that's the way Corsi operates. Corsi is widely delegitimized after the Swiftboat experience. We'll see how this plays out going forward. Joe Klein, Joe Klein becoming every liberal blogger's best friend these days, after being probably their least favorite member of the mainstream media not too long ago. I think I failed to carry that.
Fair enough. I'll go ahead and give you Byron York's take on it, which was not so much as to rise to defend Corsi, but
I have Klein's thing when
okay, but York's reaction was more to rise and defend the Swiftboaters.
Can't let that one go.
Oh well, we don't want to get in the weeds on the Swift boats, but this is what he says. Does anyone remember that the true author of the Swiftboat book was John O'Neill, and that the other Swiftboat veterans who served alongside Carey in Vietnam? The power of the Swiftboat accusations was based on the fact that Carey's fellow officers believed him unfit to be the commander-in-chief. They've had specific stories based on their first-hand memories to tell about Carey's service in Vietnam. I've written before that that some of those memories were accurate and some weren't. But in any event, Jerome Corsi wasn't part of that group. Personal testimony is powerful. Corsi didn't have any to add on the Swiftboat accounts in 2004. Now Corsi's Obama book, while selling well, doesn't have the same impact. If he had written it with to come up with a hypothetical, several of the ministers who worked with Obama in the 1980s who says he's unfit for office, then that would have been a big story and would be comparable to the Swiftboat book. But those ministers aren't saying that. This is not 2004. So just saying that this is nowhere near what the Swiftboats was.
I mean, obviously there's a certain amount of skepticism on the left about how fervent conservative agita is over folks like Corsi. Obviously has an unwillingness to fully embrace. But is there a quiet happiness that these things are being pushed out there and the condemnations will be very, very quiet?
Oh, well, I mean, he doesn't really even condemn Corsi there, except to just say that his book's not that big a deal.
Well, yeah, and that's pretty soft when arguably, as Joe Klein says in his post, Joe Klein actually talks about how his consternation that his mother is buying into the Barack Obama has
We're talking about Joe Klein's mother?
Line.
We're talking about Joe Klein's mother?
Joe Klein's post at Swampland, the Time Magazine blog.
I just want to be clear that you're the one that brought Joe Klein's mother into this.
Yeah. So he's expressing consternation that Corsi's book is getting a hearing that is being seen as giving credibility to these scurrilous claims. So we know the market for trash is there and not so far from home. And we know that Mary Matlin, who appears regularly on mainstream media programs like Meet the Press, called the Corsi book in the New York Times today, quote, a piece of scholarship and a good one at that. Mary Matlin, who runs the imprint that's publishing the book. But hey, Mary stands to make big bucks off this scholarship, which I'm sure was submitted for peer review and otherwise held to the highest editorial standards. And I'm sure her reputation and media genicity won't be damaged by this poisonous crap. And we're all friends here, aren't we? And they say politics ain't beanbag. It's all in the game to tell innocent, well-intentioned people that Barack Obama is a secret Muslim or that John Kerry wasn't really a hero in Vietnam. Or as George Bush once told a rightly outraged John McCain, whose wife and daughter Bush minions had smeared, it's just politics. Back in the day, John McCain was the sort of politician who would stand first in line to call out this sort of swill. We're not seeing those sorts of claims being made about McCain this year because Democrats tend not to do that sort of thing. They are the sorts of claims that Bush Republicans make. They range from the blatantly extracurricular, like Corsi's book, to the official McCain-sanctioned introduction made by Joe Lieberman, of all people, yesterday, that Obama doesn't, quote, put America first. I know that people like me are supposed to try to be fair and balanced. The Fox mockery of our sappy professorial standards seem more brutally appropriate with each passing year. In the past, I would achieve a semblance or an illusion of balance by criticizing Democrats for not responding effectively when right-wing sludge emergence poisoned our national elections with their filth and lies. And it's true, as John Kerry knows, that a more effective response and a bolder campaign might have neutralized the Swiftboat assault 4 years ago. It's also true that Corsi's book this time is far less effective than a Swiftboat venture, agreement with Byron York, since it doesn't come equipped with veterans willing to defile their service by telling lies to the camera. There's no excuse... I'm sorry.
No, go for it, Court.
Almost done. There's no excuse for what the McCain campaign is doing on the Putting America First front. There's no way to balance it or explain it other as evidence of severe character defect on the part of the candidate who allows it to be used. I'll leave it there.
I think that's good. I think the media has been desperate for a new Swiftboat to get excited about because as the Washington Post story pointed out today, this is not the first anti-Obama book out there. This is just the most kind of salacious one that they could find so far.
Probably the most commercially successful one.
Well, you know, I was going to officially endorse an anti-Obama book. David Freddoso has a good one out. He writes for The Corner called The Case Against Obama. And
how's that one selling?
It's on like 35 at Amazon. It's not number one at the New York Times, but it's kicking Nancy's books butt. So 35 on Amazon. I think he's actually gonna be at like 10 or he's gonna be in the top 25 of the New York Times bestseller list as well.
Now, there's certainly challenges to the claims of his book as well. I don't have them at my fingertips, but his book, I think, is at least more on matters of issues and not about salacious rumor mongering.
I actually have that book, and I will recommend it.
So, but what does it say about the rank and file conservative movement that the rumor mongering one is selling infinitely better than the issue based one?
Hey, it's not like the New York Times bestseller list is filled with the most fact-filled tomes every time. People like the salacious. I think you can tell by the media attention. Freddoso's book's been out for a while. This one's just coming out now. They need a Swiftboat villain, and Corsi, who's just closely related enough to the Swiftboaters, is nice enough to fit the bill. So I think I think Joe Klein had that article in the back of his mind for a while, and he just couldn't wait to unload it, and this gave him the opportunity to do so.
Well, Klein, earlier in the race was predicted that John McCain was going to run an honorable campaign. Bloggers like Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo were publicly keeping his feet to the fire when McCain would do things like country first, American president that America's been waiting for kind of things, and go back to Joe Klein and say, do you still think it's going to be an honorable campaign? And to Joe Klein's credit, he has responded and adjusted his thoughts accordingly. So I don't think he was itching to unload on McCain. He began this primary still praising John McCain.
Yeah, well, I never thought John McCain respected Obama enough for this campaign to stay clean. So I never shared those delusions.
You want to talk about net neutrality before we wrap things up?
Oh, yeah, just really quickly, just because it was an event here at Heritage that got promoted on Drudge. Not our write-up of it, but there's a Business and Media Institute article about comments the FCC Commissioner Robert McDowell made here. It was kind of more predicting what the future was going to look like on the net neutrality issue. Of course, 2 weeks ago, the FCC had a 3-2 vote condemning Comcast for managing its internet traffic to limit some users in the amount of peer-to-peer file sharing they use. Specifically, BitTorrent was the software that was particularly targeted. And he predicted that, quote, I think the fear is that somehow large corporations will censor their content, their points of view, and their points of view. I think the bigger concern for them should be if you have the government dictating content policy, which would be the way, which by the way would be a big problem for the First Amendment. Then whoever's in charge of government is going to determine what is fair under a so-called fairness doctrine, which won't be called that; it'll be called something else. So basically, what McDowell is predicting is that next year, when Obama and the Democrats have control of Congress, you're going to see some legislation possibly called under the banner of net neutrality that's going to try to enact new laws that will take the old school fairness doctrine of the 80s, which was a regulatory doctrine, and imply that to law on the internet and start to see content be regulated on the internet.
Now, does Heritage subscribe to that view, or is Heritage against net neutrality?
Oh, Heritage is very strongly against net neutrality. No.
That's not in sync with a lot of the conservative blogosphere, not to mention the liberal blogosphere.
I'm sorry?
That's not really in sync with a lot of the conservative blogosphere, not to mention the liberal blogosphere.
That is not true at all. You have David All, who is... I like David. David has a minority position on the issue.
So I'm happy to be corrected. Most conservative bloggers are against net neutrality?
Yes. I would recommend you not read Tech Republican when you want to know what the conservative position on tech issues are, and I would instead direct you towards the Technology Liberation Front.
There has been some liberal conservative partnering on this issue.
Mostly all gone through channeled through David All.
Gotcha.
Who I like and respect.
Now, you also called to my attention Josh Silver's post, the Huffington Post. Josh Silver is the head of Free Press,
right?
Leading organization in defending net neutrality, and also a neighbor of mine here in Western Massachusetts. What did Josh Silver have to say?
Well, he just makes stuff up. He says, blah, blah, blah. Comcast was caught red-handed, secretly discriminating against innovative technology used for high definition online TV, using the same censorship technology the Chinese government uses to block free speech. That's not the making up part. In reality, the FCC's decision is not about regulation, it's about law and order. If someone is caught red-handed committing a crime, their punishment is not regulation, it's justice. There's no crime here. Net neutrality is not a law, it's not a regulation. In fact, that's why Markey has a bill trying to make it law. There was a statement of principle, which any first-year student in administrative law will tell you is not law by any stretch of the imagination. It's not even a regulation, it's not a law, and that's why when the New York Times reported the story, they said that the Comcast ruling by the FCC was precedent-setting, because before then there was nothing to point to and say, that's a crime. So he's just wrong there.
Well, I'm not in a position to defend Josh on this because I don't know the issue well enough. I know Josh personally.
Well,
I know he's not a liar.
If you can send him an email and ask him, what either cite a regulation or a statute or some type of code as to what crime Comcast committed, I will gladly issue a retraction.
I would be happy to reach out to Josh and see maybe if Josh would want to come on Blogging Heads and maybe talk about this in detail with you or someone else at Heritage about net neutrality. I would bet he'd be eager to do that.
Fair enough. Well, I think we're pushing up on an hour here, so we'll end it there.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Oops. Oh.